What happens when we refuse to accept that animals are capable of feeling pain? Well, in the mid-17th century, René Descartes, that one, decided to test the hypothesis that animals, being soulless, can't feel pain by taking his wife's dog, nailing it to a board, and chopping it open whilst it was still alive. Inevitably, the conviction that animals do not feel pain leads to exactly these kinds of egregious breaches of our duty of care towards them, and the infliction of cruelty and suffering, even in the service of the most trivial human interests. I mean, if animals can't feel pain at all, then why not do anything we please to them without taking their welfare into account? Well, to protect animals against such unreasonable kinds of treatment, legislation has recently been proposed by the UK government. The Animal Welfare or Sentience Bill is currently being debated in the House of Lords. I've read the bill, it's very short, you can read it too. It seeks to establish two things. First, it recognises, for the first time ever in UK law, the sentience of animals. That is, it provides a legal recognition of their ability to feel pain. Second, it seeks to establish an Animal Sentience Committee that can scrutinise government policy and produce a report that doesn't in any way bind the government, but which the government must respond to with a statement in Parliament. Quite a mild and base-level attempt to undo some of the historical injustices that we've visited upon animals, I think you'll agree. But of course, not everybody is so excited about the legal protection of animals against human cruelty. Critics of the proposed bill include a number of Conservative donors and MPs, such as the billionaire Lord Michael Spencer, and representatives of industries that rely on animal cruelty, such as Martin Salter of the Angling Trust, who fears that the bill might, quote, herald the start of a systematic assault on country sports such as fishing and shooting. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's please just take a moment to properly reflect on this statement that we've just heard. What does it say about the industry that you represent, Mr. Salter, if a bill that goes no further than to recognise the undeniable truth that animals are capable of feeling pain is enough to seriously threaten that industry? I oppose the legal recognition of animal suffering, you appear to be saying, because recognising animal suffering would threaten my practices. Don't you think that says a bit more about your practices than it does about the bill? If the mere assertion that animals can feel pain is such a threat to what you're doing, then maybe what you're doing isn't the most ethically commendable thing in the first place. Mr. Salter and his ilk are scared, I'll repeat, of, quote, zealots and ideologues heralding a systematic assault on country sports. Well, now I just want to appeal to your ethical intuitions, dear viewer. What do you think should take priority, in your view, in the construction of legislation? The protection of the defenceless against cruelty, or the continued success of such important sports as shooting and yanking fish out of the water on hooks? We're not even talking about food here, right? This legislation is being opposed on the grounds that simply recognizing that animals can suffer may threaten these kinds of sadistic sporting activities. Well, so it does, and so it should. I mean, imagine that we were talking about a proposed bill that just established the sentience of dogs. Now imagine I were to say, legislation that legally recognizes that dogs can feel pain and attempts to stop people from harming them would be really bad for the industry that I work in. I think your response would be to say, well, what on earth is your industry doing to dogs? It's probably a good thing that someone's trying to stop you. This is just not a defensible reason to oppose animal welfare legislation. Think about it, there are really only two reasons one might have for opposing this bill. They might oppose it on the grounds that animals can't feel pain, which is, of course, a Cartesian fantasy that was outdated enough even for Descartes himself. After all, if we believe that other animals' eyes evolved to see and their ears to hear and legs to move, why not their pain receptors to feel pain? The only other reason why a person could wish for this fact not to be recognised in UK law is if they think that animals do feel pain, but that this should be ignored or obfuscated, or at least that we should have the right to legislate without any regard for the welfare of animals. If that's your opinion, then fine, but you should say that's what you think and be honest about it. The Times newspaper this morning published an editorial opinion piece opposing the Animal Sentience Bill. Now, here's some further indication of the moral confusion that we're dealing with. The editors of that paper are talking here about the advice that would be given by this proposed Animal Sentience Committee. Ministers would not be obliged to follow its advice, but would inevitably come under strong pressure to do so. That could have a chilling impact on animal science, pest control, and countryside pursuits. Countryside pursuits? Chilling effect? Come on, we're talking here about the most basic possible legal protection of the rights of animals to be protected from needless suffering. And you think that an appropriate objection to this is fears that this might prevent you from running around in the countryside and killing animals for sport? I think it's high time that such legislation was introduced, forcing you, if not to stop such countryside pursuits, at least to recognize that those pursuits are at the expense of animals who can feel pain and who do not need to die. Right, the fact that these are the grounds on which this bill is being opposed does more, in my view, to support its implementation than to prevent it. Here's another spark of brilliance from that same op-ed. This well-intentioned but poorly drafted piece of legislation risks opening the door to campaigners seeking to outlaw lawful activities while wrapping swaths of the economy, from farming to medicine, construction and trade, in red tape. Let me just repeat that for you. They're worried about campaigners trying to, quote, outlaw lawful activities. What other kind of activities can be outlawed? Oh no, this new law that's being proposed will lead to changes in the law. I've never heard a more tautological statement of nonsense. Again, this is partnered with a fear that the bill will lead to, quote, wrapping swaths of the economy, from farming to medicine, construction and trade, in red tape. But this only demonstrates how deeply we've allowed animal suffering to root itself into our practices. Think about what's being said here. The mere recognition of the sentience of animals is enough to challenge the way that we farm, eat, buy, build, and trade. Well, if that's how deeply animal suffering has embedded itself into our culture, then it's about time that we had some legislation that recognizes it and protects them from it. The fact that this is the first time that animal sentience will ever be recognized in UK law is an embarrassment enough. The fact that in response to this bill, we're hearing talk in one of my country's most widely syndicated publications of hunting for sport, angling, and other countryside pursuits, as if these are in any way morally comparable to the life and suffering of an animal, only makes things so much worse. I hope that this video can serve as a demonstration of the omnipresence of animal suffering in our society. I only wish that it were present too in the moral consideration of the general public. Now, I'm afraid to say there's not really much that we can do to influence the course of this bill, but if you didn't know that this was currently being debated in the UK government, you're welcome. I suppose that the result of such deliberations will settle the question of whether we are truly, as is so often said, a nation of animal lovers. I've been Alex O'Connor, or Cosmic Skeptic. If you like my work, please do consider supporting me on Patreon. And a special thanks, as always, to my top-tier patrons for their continued support. Follow me on social media at Cosmic Skeptic. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.